the people who are on here now, this is going to be a fairly informal chat this evening. We don't have like a specific demo or like straight and narrow topic. This is our chance to welcome all the people from Adobe to our little corner of the internet and get hear straight from them about After Effects and get some questions that we might have answered. So I'm going to start with my lovely slide deck. All right, so here we are at the October Digital Meetup with the After Effects team. So hi, After Effects team, everyone that's here. So tonight, really quick, we're going to talk about what's new in After Effects. It's going to be really quick because we can hear straight from these lovely guests here tonight about what's new with After Effects. We're going to talk with all of them. If there is any show and tell for tonight, we'll go over that. And then we'll give away 1 year of Creative Cloud to somebody who's in attendance this evening. And then we'll talk a little bit about next month's meetup, which will also be our last one for the year. So first, yesterday was the start of Adobe Max. It was also the release of After Effects version 22. So this was me yesterday. It's After Effects Day. Just ran out and updated everything I could and told everyone I could. That's also pretty close to how my hair looks when I actually wake up too. So it's fitting. So what's new in After Effects 22? Lots of things. So we have multi-frame rendering, new render queue and notifications, composition profiler, speculative preview, media encoders working a little bit faster with multi-frame rendering. We got 10-bit HEVC improvements, some new LUT interpolation options, unified version number. You might have noticed now we're on 22. The last version was 18.4. So there's a little jump there. And more. There's lots of things that didn't make it into the headlines that I know that we'll probably talk about as well. So let's hear now. We're going to talk with the After Effects team and say hi to everyone. And let me know if these are wrong or if I missed anyone that's here. We have Victoria, Tim, Sean, Christine, and Katie, I believe. Am I missing anyone?
That's us.
Who is that?
Nope, that's us.
That's us. Okay. So here we are. And first, I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming. I know Victoria and Tim, you have graced us with your presences in previous years to show us what's new, but we're really excited to have you here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
It's fun.
So first, I'll start with the main question, is why version 22 and not version 19?
Who wants to take that one?
I can. Tim can.
Victoria loves it. I'm just kind of so on it because my brain breaks a little bit when what happened to 1920. But Victoria, you love this one.
I am extremely happy about this because it means that I don't have users going, wait, is it 2022 or is it version 18 or was that version CC 2018? It's all 22. So I'm just happy that it's one thing and that we don't have year numbers and version numbers colliding anymore. That feels like a win.
Yeah.
I think there were some engineering reasons to do it though too.
Yeah, I mean, we're now on After Effects 2022, and so that'll be version 22 all the way until we ship After Effects 2023, which will move to version 23. All the products for video and audio have moved to 22. So we're all on the same one. So when we think about which version of Premiere Pro works well with After Effects or with Media Encoder, 22. That's what you want this year. And we'll maintain the compatibility even as we ship 22.1 or 22.4 or whatever throughout the year. As long as it's 22, that will maintain compatibility across all the products.
Yeah, that is going to be convenient because that's one of the things that always tripped me up with version compatibility was knowing like what version of Premiere am I supposed to work on with what version of After Effects, and to get copy and paste and everything working smoothly. So this is going to be nice to have kind of a unified. And I knew it was Premiere and After Effects, but you said it's all of the video and Adobe and the audio products are nice.
So Audition and Character Animator. Character Animator went from version 4.
Yeah, a little bit of a jump.
Big jump there.
Which is confusing, but that's where they're at.
Yeah, that's okay. So there's obviously quite a lot in this release, and some of these features are familiar to a few of us because we've been talking about them at various meetups from the beta. And so I'm a little curious, like at what point do you decide a feature is ready to move from beta into the public shipping release?
Hey, Christine, you should answer this one. You're working on that right now.
I am working on that, but I also am new to the Adobe team, so I'll answer this as best as I understand it so far, which is basically once it's been in beta long enough that we feel that enough users have been able to touch it, been able to use it, that we've had enough feedback on if they're running into bugs, how many different types of hardware have we had coverage over with the users? Just basically, are we getting enough coverage with it to feel confident between that and our own testing that it's ready to make it to a live release?
Yeah. I'll add to that just to give you guys some numbers, because we're looking, as Christine said, both subjective but also objective data to sort of give us that. So for the case of like multi-frame rendering and all the features that you just sort of touched on briefly, we've been in beta since March 20. What year are we in? 21. This is where I get picked up. We're in 2021 still.
What is time?
That's right. So we've been in beta with these features for nearly 9 months. In that time, we've had more than 50,000 people sort of engage with our posts, our blog posts and forum posts about this. We've had more than 500 users sort of either provide projects to us or feedback as it's been going, like very subjective. So we knew from the subjective side, like we were hearing the right stories. But from a like purely objective, we were in beta averaging about 50,000 previews or exports per day using multi-frame rendering. And so we were very sure that that was working for users. Now, we know that we're still only a few thousand people overall providing all that data. So we fully expected today, as we have, look at this project that like is, like 70,000 assets and it, it's slow. Well, it was slow yesterday and it's still slow today, but maybe it's a little bit faster today. So that's sort of now, we said, okay, these are all the features that are ready. Let's ship these. And it just coincidentally turned out to be at max. We could have said, we're not ready yet and gone in February. We actually had said, maybe we should go in June earlier this year. But we looked at our third-party plugin developers and said, you guys aren't ready. And so that's going to make it worse experience for our customers. And so we held off and said, look, you've got another 4 months, get this done. And so, the result of that, though, was Red Giant / Maxon, Forest Effects, Revision Effects, FX Factory, all of those plugins are ready. There's like 500 or 600 MFR ready plugins besides the 300 that we shipped. And so, that was another sign for us to get ready to ship. But a lot of objective, a lot of subjective data.
Yeah, it's been interesting watching the beta over this time and seeing like not just multi-frame rendering, but some other features, like when they start to like suddenly jump over. And you can definitely tell some of them took a while, obviously multi-frame rendering being one of them, but some of them felt like they had moved over, at least from the public side of visibility into the betas pretty quickly into the public releases. Like one that's kind of coming to mind now, I think, is some of the I feel like tapered strokes and some of the shape repeater stuff. It felt like it had a very short amount of time in the public beta. But when you're looking at features, I know you can't be too specific. What kind of timeline do you look at when you get an idea for something, either based on user feedback or some internal ideas that people have, to when it's publicly visible in the beta?
That varies so widely. And I'll say one of the things, I've been at Adobe almost 6 years now. I am still every day learning what is easy and what is hard to do in After Effects. It is never the things that you think are obvious. You're like, oh, we'll just put a button on the toolbar. That will be 6 months. What? But like, we can get Sensei to cut people out of video. Yeah, let's ship that next week. What? I still am surprised all the time by that. And it's so much of it is being we're this deeply interconnected ecosystem of shared components and technologies and also stuff that's been in the app for 30 years. And when you have all of that there, then everything has to work together, and we have to make stuff work in After Effects but not break our partners over on the Premiere side or in other Creative Cloud apps. There's a lot to balance there, and so that stuff is always a surprise. There's not an easy answer to that question.
And I suppose especially with how, yeah, like you said, like a 30-year-old code base for After Effects. And I know about, was that 5 or 6 years ago, Victoria, might have been either just when you joined Adobe or just before, there was the whole separating the thing from the thing. And I don't know how many of our members are here that remember a while ago, like 13.2 or 13.0, somewhere around there, you couldn't watch your previews and interact with stuff at the same time in the app. And I remember that was a big deal at the time, and that seemed to set the foundation for, you know, all the stuff that happened since. So I definitely could see how it's a complicated thing that, you know, us users never really get the visibility into.
Tim, I think, was the only one of us who was here at that time.
Seems
right?
like, yeah.
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 It's like, yep. I don't want to remember that.
That was a long, that honestly, I think was a harder project than multi-frame rendering. Not that multi-frame rendering wasn't a struggle, but one of the big challenges for After Effects in being an older application, starting from an older application, I want to make a little asterisk there real quick that not all the code in After Effects is 30 years old. In fact, a lot of what it runs on these days is shared code within Adobe that is refreshed constantly. Things like our type engine, things like our media engine, things like that are always being worked on. But when After Effects was first constructed, the code for running the UI and the code for doing the rendering, that was all intertwined. The button and the result all kind of linked up together. And the big change we made in 13.5 was taking all of the UI components and making sure that they were not being blocked by After Effects actively rendering something in the background. Without that, we wouldn't have been able to do multi-frame rendering, and it was a lot of weird, squirrely work at the time to just get that out the door. And that was painful back in the day, but I'm glad we did it. It was really, really necessary, and this is finally where we're seeing the big gains, is now being able to let the renderer go off and play in its own sandbox.
And Brian Klein, I saw you raise your hand earlier. Do you have a question or a comment?
No, I was just saying I remember that, but that was it.
Yeah. He's just using the tool for like, yes, I recall.
I would say too, like if anyone has a comment or a question, you know, feel free to chime in whenever. If you'd rather use the chat, feel free to do that and pop a question there, and we'll keep an eye at it and send the questions out this way.
Yeah, I saw
So.
that you said that Media Encoder also got support for multi-frame rendering. Is that are the speed changes comparable to what we see in After Effects? I guess that's what my question is.
Yeah, so when you have an After Effects composition that is being rendered by Adobe Media Encoder, you'll get essentially the same performance increase as you will if you render that inside After Effects. So Media Encoder is actually talking to what we call a headless, but basically an invisible instance of After Effects, and it's using the exact same multi-frame rendering engine. So, you know, it should be 2x, 3x, whatever your machine can do inside After Effects, it should be able to do outside. And if you're comfortable with things like AE render on the command line or in the terminal, that fully supports multi-frame rendering. You can actually turn it on and off, and you can set sort of, you know, I want to be able to use 50% of my machine or 100% of my machine. I've got a demo where we've got a 128 core machine, and I can use all 128 cores rendering 4 different projects simultaneously as fast as, you know, you've ever seen them render. So
That sounds like a beast of a machine.
Yeah.
Threadripper Pro, 128 cores, 256 gig of RAM.
Yikes.
Yeah.
Our hardware partners have been incredibly generous and helpful in this process.
They have.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like what does that testing process look like for, especially for multi-frame rendering, trying to find out what these speed gains are going to be. Like what kind of equipment range do you end up testing on?
Yeah, so we've built a performance lab really as part of multi-frame rendering. And so we have both Mac and Windows, and we start sort of at the low end 4-core machine. So we did update our system requirements for After Effects to really support multi-frame rendering. So, we strongly encourage sort of at least quad core, but, go crazy. And then we take that through to pretty much as whatever we can at the maximum end. So on the Mac side, we have 2019 Mac Pro with 48 cores and 96 gig of RAM. So it's not the extreme Mac, but it's a really good representation of a good Mac Pro. And then, like I said, we have the Threadripper Pro on the high end Windows side. We also then scale somewhere in between that. So we look at 4-core, 6-core, 8, 10, 16, and 32 core machines in between. So we can get a good range. And then we have video cards from NVIDIA and from AMD, and also embedded and the new discrete cards that Intel are producing. So we have a range of those across all of the machines. So we've tried to create a bunch. We didn't just magically come up with sort of the configuration. We actually have a lot of data from users like you guys who are actually sending us, as part of sort of when you start up After Effects, we get a little bit of anonymous information about your hardware configuration. And so we looked at that, said, okay, look, the vast majority of users are somewhere between 8 and 16 cores, between 16 and 64 gig of RAM, this much GPU VRAM, and we sort of built machines to sort of mimic, where our users actually land, so that we could come back to you and say, okay, if you have an 8-core machine with 16 gig of RAM, you probably get 1.5 times performance increase. And we've got 500 tests running every day on that machine that validates and backs up that data. But even when we went to beta, just to sort of come all the way back to that question, we've now had 30,000 renders of this like test project or something that we've handed out to people. And every one of those lined up with the data that we were collecting internally. Like the numbers were so accurate, it was scary for us. It's like, okay, either we got this really right or something's really wrong. But it aligned. And so that was like another piece of confidence, but also, okay, we've got all this data and we can trust this data. So, and Victoria mentioned, I could talk forever on this. Probably shut up when it's time. But like working with our hardware partners, and like we've talked about Puget Systems in the past, but HP and Dell and Lenovo, they've all run suites of tests.
Yeah, Intel too.
Yeah, and it's like there's reports out there. It's all there for you guys to actually sort of digest as well. This is the recommended machine. If you want to go down this hardware partner and you want to spend this much money, this is what you'll get out of After Effects. And so, great validation out of that as well.
And I'll say one of the things we've really seen with multi-frame rendering is it's not just that your machine gets faster, which is absolutely the case, but the gap between the low-end machines and the high-end machines got a lot wider. So if you get a better machine, you'll see an even bigger boost. Yeah. And that's something I think has made our hardware partners very happy. You've given people a reason to upgrade.
Yeah, really has.
And Jim Collins, I see you had your hand raised earlier.
Yeah, this is kind of a curiosity question more than anything else. So all this currently runs under Windows 10?
Windows 10, Windows 11, Mac OS 10, 15, 11, and 12.
Is there going to be a time in the near future, or maybe it's a long ways out, before you're forced to go to 11?
No. Partly because none of us really have moved to 11 internally.
I remember a time when you changed things and you're kind of forced to go to 10. I was kind of a little miffed about that because 7 was working just fine for me. And then I think you did some things internally that forced that change.
Yeah, so there's two things to be thinking about from that perspective. If Microsoft is still supporting the operating system version, we will still support the operating system version. That's our sort of blanket policy. So when 7's support ended, we couldn't really go back to them and continue to ask for fixes. The other piece, which is hitting, and if you're a Mac user, we couldn't continue to support 10.14 with this release. Some of the Sensei, which is a word we like to throw around, but our machine learning technology is now built upon frameworks that are in 10.15 and above. And so we either have to make a choice to say, we don't support this set of features on 10.14, which gets very complicated to maintain, or we just sort of cut off and say, okay, we don't support 10.14 at all. So, our goal is to support as many users as we can. We actually look at all the data, and even we cut off one version of Windows 10 because Microsoft have, but it was like 0.5% of all of our users. And so, we think they can probably just upgrade at that point, and be okay. So, but totally hear you. We don't want to cut people off when operating systems are still in wide use.
Yeah, and is it, I remember from a ways back, I feel like there was some, I don't want to say feature parity because that's not the right word, but looking at things like Mercury engine, whereas for Mac now it's Metal, for Windows it could be CUDA. I'm not sure if OpenCL is still available on Windows, but it's EOL on Mac. Are there a lot of software discrepancies that you need to handle between Windows and Mac?
Yes.
Tim is making a face.
Tim suffers at the hands of all of this.
All the freaking time. Yeah. Yeah.
Just at a high level, yes. So for Mac, it's Metal support only these days. On Windows, you still do have CUDA and OpenCL, but our display pipeline, which is separate than the compute. So one thing you may never know, because it was still news to me for a long time, is when you switch between Mercury software mode and Mercury GPU mode, what you're actually switching is the compute functionality. So when an effect needs to compute, the display of pixels, not the rendering to the screen, but the actual computation, that is where that Mercury GPU flag comes in. And so that's still OpenCL or CUDA, but our display pipeline now today is DirectX 12. So underneath all of that, when we're getting bits to the screen, it's DirectX 12. We are investigating how do we make DirectX 12 a compute option as well. And then we maybe rebuild OpenCL and CUDA sort of sitting on top of that. There's lots of different ways that our GPU Foundation team is trying to work. So to go on from that, we have a team that's responsible for that layer in After Effects, and Premiere, and in our other products. And so the goal is that we talk to one layer and it looks the same to After Effects. It's not always the case, but that's how we're trying to abstract that out to make that easier.
Yeah, on the user end, I do have to say, that's one of the things that always kind of amazes me is that, it's not just After Effects, but the fact that you can open up something and it's going to display and give you the same results no matter what computer you end up opening it up on, which is black magic to me. I don't know.
Team puts a lot of work into that, actually, and that is something that, with porting effects to the GPU, making sure that they look the same as if you render them on the CPU. All of that, there's a bunch of automated testing that goes in to make sure that things are above a certain threshold and make sure that they're accurate. Because the thing that we really don't want to have happen is you hand a project off to someone else, they open it up and it looks completely different on their system.
That threshold is like in a 2 million pixel composition. We're not allowed to have more than 2,000 pixels that are different. And so you'll never visually see it, but our systems will detect that. Premiere doesn't have that same restriction. If you actually flip between Premiere versions or machines, you might actually see significant differences because it's not as important when you're sort of editing. But for multi-machine renders or anything like that, you need pixel parity. So.
Yeah, and that's it's important for those of us who are peeping pixels all day. So, what's up, Kyle?
In what other ways are you guys better than the Premiere team?
Every way? No. No.
It does sound like a phrase fraught with danger there, Sean. Yeah.
I just want to get it on the recording.
Yeah, we love the Premiere team. We love working with them. Their focus is on as close to real-time sort of playback with their sequences. So they'll actually drop frames as the playback is going on, just so that you get a better experience of the video you're trying to edit. This is really the biggest difference. For After Effects, we will never drop you a frame. We'll make you wait for that frame. And because we know you need to see every single frame to know that your animation is really good. And that's actually a place where we bump into each other in a good way, but it's like when we think about why doesn't Premiere and After Effects have the same rendering engine and look the same and run the same speed, it's because we're actually operating under two different models. And so, when we do cross over things like dynamic link or motion graphics templates, we actually have to be really conscious that Premiere might ask for 10 frames and then say, actually, I didn't need 8 of those. And we're like, no, you really wanted 8 of those frames. And it's like, no, I don't care about them. I've moved on. And so, that's a great place for us to have some fun as two teams. But, we're not better than them. We're just two different teams trying to build products for you guys to make the best designs and creations you can. So is that safe?
That was beautiful.
Thanks.
So for you guys, like, you're literally working at Adobe, you're living and breathing this stuff every day. What's sort of like your favorite feature for After Effects? I'd love to hear that directly from you guys.
Ooh. Let's start with somebody who hasn't had a chance to talk much. Christine or Katie, do you want to jump in?
Sure, I can jump in. So full disclosure, I think I'm the only person here without a design background. So my After Effects usage is pretty basic. But the other day I learned about proxies, and that is so cool to me, just to be able to make things work for your hardware, no matter, well, with some caveats, but to be able to pare things down enough to run really complex and high quality footage when you may not have an optimized system to do that. That was really cool to me.
Tim is also Team Proxy.
Totally. Proxies are the most criminally underused feature in After Effects.
I will say that besides all the things that just seem like magic I've been a compositor for a long time, so things like Rotobrush 2 and such that are just such huge jumps in ability that it doesn't seem fair almost to those of us who've been, rotoscoping for a long time. But actually, one of my favorite things right now, just because of the hint of what it can mean to us, is our new 3D gizmo and ground plane, and the manipulation of the space around 3D makes me very excited.
And then go ahead.
I was going to say, Christine almost stole mine, so I'll just add on is that I'm super excited about the potential of what's behind the ground plane and the 3D gizmo, which is the Draft 3D renderer, which really is faster than real time for manipulating 3D in After Effects. And there's a whole bunch of stuff we got going behind the scenes that we can't talk about yet that this thing is going to be doing for us in the future. So if it's not something you've used regularly, even though it is limited in some ways, like blend modes don't work in it right now, just click that button, Draft 3D, turn it on, and whiz around in 3D space until you get dizzy.
Yeah.
Or don't get dizzy.
Or use it to design a project in 3D.
I can't honestly say I've gotten dizzy once, but it's still fun to play with. That's for sure.
Victoria, do you want to go?
I've got to jump in and say I am incredibly partial to essential properties and Mogerts, because my background is in documentary, and the amount of time those features would have saved me in my old job, I look back and I'm like, that's weeks of my life.
Yeah. I mean, it may not be obvious here, but everyone who's talking about their features is really talking about the things they're working on.
Yes.
And that, I mean, that's a sign like how much we love this job, all of us. Like the most favorite thing is the thing we're working on, because that's what we get to do. It's like amazing. I am very partial, obviously, to everything we just shipped in the last few days. That has been one of my team working on it. I will point out the composition profiler, which hopefully we can show and talk about. I've told Victoria this before because she probably forgot at some point. The day I interviewed, I had lunch with Victoria and I pitched the composition profiler as a thing. And I'm sure that was the last anyone ever thought about it. Then we did this thing where we have an innovation week where we get to just play with ideas and come up with things and see what we might think about in the future. And I prototyped out this composition profiler, and then we put it back on the shelf. And then 12 months later, I looked at my team and I said, I think this is the right time to build this for real. And we figured out how to build it. And we thought, well, this will be a high-end power feature for people. And then we pushed it out. And then there were like 100,000 retweets or something of you know, the composition profile like going to beta. And we're like, what is going on here? But if you haven't used it and you start to use it, it will open your eyes to how After Effects works, and you can very quickly make your life much easier. I mean, a great example we heard today, someone's like, I brought in an Illustrator composition and it was really slow, and then I replaced 3 solid layers with actual solids in After Effects, and now it's all fast. And it's like, you would have no idea that that's the problem, and now you do. And that's, to me, you know, it brings tears to my eyes that I can help people like this, I'll be honest. So anyway, that's it, composition profiler for me.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things that when it popped up, at first I was like, oh, this is going to be kind of fun to just play with and see, but I probably won't use it. I don't think I've turned that feature off since enabling it now. Like, it's so handy to just know what layers and what effects and what properties are taking up a little bit more time, and maybe I can, you know, spend endless time tweaking it to save like fractions of a second on my frames. But it's great to see.
And it's important to know that the snail's name is Oscar.
Oscar Go.
Oscar Go. Nice.
Yep. The After Effects team really loves terrible puns. So all of our releases have food pun code names. This one, because we're using all your cores, it's Cores on the Cob.
That's right.
Very nice.
And the secret project, should you know how to find it, may emphasize all of this.
I haven't looked for it yet. This version.
Yeah, Brian Carter made this one. He's the newest QE on our team, and it's a lot of fun. There's some Easter eggs inside the secret project too.
Yeah.
How did the if anyone knows, like, how did the secret project end up becoming a thing? I know it's been there for a long time.
Tim knows this.
Everyone looks at Tim.
Yeah.
Tim,
he's got
is it
a
a secret?
of every single one of them. So.
And that reminds me, I need to render the Cores on the Cob project and add it to my secret YouTube playlist of After Effects secret credits. I mean, it used to be very simple back in the day. It was just a still frame. Just the list of names of people who worked on After Effects. I don't know why it was always done as a secret window in After Effects and not as part of the basic splash screen like Photoshop and Premiere do, but for some reason in After Effects it was always slightly hidden. And at some point it shifted to being a project file. And that project file first was just a still frame itself. It was just, you know, a bunch of text layers. And I think it was Jeff Almasol, who's now on the character animator team, started adding a little bit of animation to it. And then he left for the character animator team. I took it over for a couple of revisions and tried getting a little fancier with the animation. Contrary to Katie's statement, I do not have a design background, so mine were not the most efficient. But then Victoria came on. She did have a design background and said, "Hey, why don't you take this over?" And so we started getting some really elegant, really nice designs. John Colombo has added to that. Brian Carter's helped. One of our engineers, Becky Fox, she provided the artwork for at least one release.
Yeah.
Quality. So yeah, compared to when I joined the team, when it was just a bunch of text layers, and now it's almost this full-on production, including audio.
There's audio in there, and I don't know how John Colombo figured out how to put audio in there. He built a sound synthesizer inside of After Effects to do that.
There's a soundtrack in this secret project, and a dance party if you can go find it.
There's one major restriction on these files, and that is they are part of the installation of After Effects. So we cannot rely on external media files. So we can't install like a music file or a video file. This has to be live and renderable in After Effects. And besides being just kind of cool to do it that way, it's also a fun challenge for us when we build it. So it's really cool to see how this has grown, and I'm kind of excited to see what happens in the next version. Who's going to take that challenge on next? Christine.
The face.
I can do it and disappoint everybody.
Oh, come on, Katie. No, and there's also one other hint there, which it grew in length because it's supposed to be the same length as the version number. So we actually got 3 extra seconds this time. So it's basically 3 more pages of credits, but it's 22 seconds.
I'm looking forward to it in another 38 years, when we get a full minute of secret project.
We may attempt to use all 290 effects all in the project at that point.
So actually, now that you bring up effects, and you mentioned earlier about some of the third-party partners having to update their effects for multi-frame rendering. And one thing that I've always been curious about is the CC effects that are in After Effects. And from what I remember, they're not really Adobe plugins. They're developed by Sycor, or another third party. How did that end up getting folded in? And now that it is part of the shipping After Effects, what's that like keeping those updated if they're not, part of Adobe's code?
Well, I've suffered through that for the last so I guess it's me. So yeah, I mean, the Sycor effects early on were there were a number of acquisitions or licensing deals, I guess, done a long time ago. So if you go to the simulation set of effects, those were all originally ones that were included, and that was actually a purchase of the effects. The Sycor effects, we continue to work with the Sycor team, and they provide new versions each release for us. So there are bug fixes that come in that we want to do, and for the case of multi-frame rendering, we actually had to have them go and do work on all 75 effects that they have. And so they would make the changes, send them to us. We built full test suites, both performance and functional. And then once we declare them as good, then we'll package them up essentially as part of After Effects. And it works the same way with the Foundry for Keylight, for Boris FX Mocha AE, for the OpenEXR set of plugins like Cryptomat and Identifier Extractor. And I'm sure I'm forgetting one other one. I guess Cinema 4D is the same sort of
That's
setup.
a big one.
Yeah. So we partner and we license with those folks. So they're often not much ahead of our beta users now. They used to be much more ahead with builds, but now they take the same beta builds, and that's what they work against. And then we, merge those bits back together. So sometimes over the years, it's sort of, this is a great effect. Lots of people use it. We'll include it going forward. And then other times, I'm sure effects have disappeared over the years as well. I think of like the Finesse color suite.
Color Finesse, yeah.
Yeah. So that came and went. I wasn't here for that, but it's one that I remember. So, yeah.
And another thing about the betas too, now that they're open, and I think it was still relatively recently too that user voice has now become part of the After Effects feedback capabilities that are out there now. How has it been for you having a much more closer connection, I guess, to direct line of feedback that's not, it's more than yelling over Twitter, and people are actually providing, hopefully, constructive, pointed feedback, but obviously sometimes not. Has it made deciding on features and bug fixes more complicated, or is it just a different process now that you have this very open tool that people can see what's being posted and vote on and comment on?
I wouldn't say that we get more feedback now than we got before, because we've always been incredibly close to our users and just constantly gathering feedback. It's just that much more open and public now. And that's the thing that's amazing about the beta, is nothing that shipped at Max this year was a secret surprise. This was all stuff that you could have tried out for months. The funny thing, though, is still a huge number of people don't even know there is a beta. I haven't tried it. And then we're like, wait, what's multi-frame rendering? And like, we've been living in a world where that's been public for 7 months.
Well, there was a story this afternoon. So render queue notifications, which we haven't really talked about. We should demo that potentially as well. But we actually finished that a number of months ago, but we decided to hold it to go with all of the multi-frame. And the developer today is like, wait, we didn't ship that months ago? Like, we've been done for so long on that feature and had completely forgotten that we hadn't shipped it. So, but I was going to point back to Victoria. What did we do yesterday as a celebration on user voice?
We marked multi-frame rendering as complete. We had a little We had a little video chat like this. We all got on there and we pushed the button together.
That's right.
And we clapped.
We did.
That was fun.
1,300 votes or something. Top thing to ever do for After Effects.
Yep. That felt good.
Yeah.
I will say that I've loved user voice this week, especially since it is my first Max. Seeing people's comments when I'm in sessions and being able to go over to user voice and say, oh, like 20 people have voted on this particular suggestion, and then I can make a note of it. And just having that real-time validation has been greatly helpful.
Keep bringing it. We need it. Like,
yeah.
I mean, that's as much as we have a plan, we want the plan to be what you guys need. And I mean, Katie and Christine and Victoria, Tim, myself, and many of the others on the team are following user voice, the bugs that come in, Twitter, Reddit, anywhere else that people are posting. We are aware of it and we are paying attention. I've probably had 5 conversations on a YouTube video today just about this sort of stuff, right? Like, and it's fun for me to pop up and be like, I can talk to you about this for real and help you here. So please keep providing the feedback, because it's the only way we're going to make this, you know, what you guys need.
So there's, I mean, obviously a lot of ideas that come from, you know, outside of Adobe. Some feature requests, some bug reports, some complaints, obviously. What is it like to go through that and decide, you know, like what the next thing you're going to work on, or if like a comment is worthy of considering?
There's a lot of different things that go into that. And I mean, we're always having to strike the balance of what do people need most with what do the most people need. And that's a key thing. Is so one of the questions we ask ourselves is, if somebody's asking for something, it's totally new ask, we've never heard of it before, how many people actually have that same need? Is it just this one person with their totally unique workflow? Because those people are out there. People use After Effects for all kinds of things you would never imagine. And they often have very specific feature requests. But then there's things like multi-frame rendering, where pretty much every user wants to render faster. I don't think we've had anybody go, can you make my machine slower? That's not a thing that happens. So
hang on.
Well, there were the people who asked us when we hit 100% of your cores, can you use maybe not 100% of my cores?
We spent 2.5 years getting it to use all your machine, and then I had to implement a feature to use less of your machine.
I think, but it's also important for us to, we can't only follow those lists of just here's what the users have wanted. We have to curate that as well with what are some things that they just may not even know or know that they need. So a lot of that also is finding out what kind of workflows user have and trying to think off of that. Well, what might they really be asking for that they're not even aware that they're asking here, and balancing that against what are going to be the bigger priorities out of those lists.
And so we look at, well, where's Adobe going as a company? What do we do to align to the broader business? And where are there opportunities for us to work together with other teams or with research? Something like Rotobrush, that's a research project that comes out of the research and development org. But that's the thing where we go, yeah, people need to cut things out of video all the time. That's a super common workflow. If we could speed that up, we could make that faster, more reliable. We can see the user value of that. And wait, there's this amazing research tech. So then those things fit together. So it's balancing a lot of different things. It's not like we don't just treat user voice as like a to-do list. There's a lot of other factors that go in, and sometimes we build stuff that no one even realized was possible.
What about the things that you build that like maybe people don't necessarily appreciate as being beneficial to them? Like, are there any features you could think of that you pushed out there and it benefits people, but they're not even paying attention to it?
Maybe Tim's proxies would be one of those that you come back to, honestly. Things that could super help them that they just don't realize are there. I think there's a lot of that.
There's a lot of those. I mean, it's such a big app. And one of my favorite things to do is a demo where I show absolutely no demo assets at all. It's all about creating new projects from a template, where you preset all of your folders, your comp settings, all of that, and just save it as a project. So when you create a new project, that pops up automatically every time. And then at the end, using the output template, file name templates, so that you never have to manually name a file again. And I love demoing that, because that's stuff that it takes 10 seconds at a time, but like over many projects, that adds up. And that stuff can really take time, and it takes a little bit of extra brain space. And just to even remember that you've named this thing correctly, it's going to the right folder, and you can automate that and get that out of the way. And I love those little time-saving features like that to automate the stuff you don't get into this business to do.
It's nice to get rid of the tedious things. But speaking of output modules, I know, Tim, you mentioned on Twitter today or yesterday about some things that have changed in the render queue. And now we have, we don't have animation codec as the default for lossless anymore.
Not as the default. I think, Sean, you might have actually been the one that instigated this. It's something we've been tossing around for a few years, but we could never agree on what the new setting would be, and we just kind of tabled the discussion, said, all right, we'll get back to that later. I think Sean had a really good reason for us to switch from animation to ProRes as our default output codec.
Yeah, no one could play animation. That was the big one. Yeah, I actually ended up doing the implementation, writing the code for this as well. So yeah, we've shipped essentially, actually, we removed like all the DV presets. So if you install fresh new preferences, you won't have the DV presets, you won't have the save preview preset. You will still have lossless and lossless with alpha, which will still use the QuickTime animation codec, so that if that's what you're used to using, it was still there. But we actually did a bunch of research, crazy, and came out with, you know, we need a ProRes 422 and a ProRes 444 essentially implementation. And so we've called that high quality and high quality with alpha. And so when you install it, it will add those output modules. So it's really just templates. And so we just add those templates. But they will sit alongside existing preferences or become your new defaults in a new situation. There's still a conversation that's happening today, whether they should have been millions of colors or trillions of colors when we push them out there. We'll figure that out over the next couple of weeks, and when we do our next update, we might tweak those a little bit. But yeah, at least now on a Mac, when you create a default output, because for our beginner users, they don't know what to use. So yeah, at least they produce something that they can play back immediately. That's great. Now, the real question is, where the heck is H.264 in the render queue? Stay tuned.
Yeah, no, I see that come up every now and then. And I mean, being in the studio world is where I come from, like that would never have been a thing. So I've never missed it. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting to see people who are like, why isn't H.264 in here? I'm like, why would you output that? But then, there are clearly like I said before, so many different workflows that people are going to have to make After Effects work for.
Yeah.
And huge numbers of people are going to social and the web.
Yep. YouTube, any of that, H.264.
Or even just sending something to somebody for review.
Yep.
That's why I use Media Encoder. But
yeah. I don't know. I think we bought a company recently, so hopefully we can figure out that review process really
quick. So I guess before I ask anything, how much can you say about Frame.io and potentially, obviously not future plans, but what that might mean for After Effects and Adobe Video products in general?
The main thing we can say is it's still really early. We're just getting to start talking to them now, because there's a weird thing that happens with acquisitions where you announce your intent to acquire and then no one can talk to anyone. And there's like a weird wall there. So it's finally closed. We're finally able to start integrating the teams, but we're in the really early stages of that. And there's some great folks, and we're really excited to get to work with them. But it's still too early to know where that all is going to go.
Yeah, and I'll get to Brian W's question really quick, but I noticed a lot of Max was about collaboration, and I just kept waiting for there to be a little bit more of a hint about what that's going to mean for Frame.io. And yeah, it sounds like since it was only about 2 or 3 weeks ago now that's acquisition is closed, that's still really early.
Yeah, the acquisition closed about 48 hours before we had to be done with the build we were shipping at Max. So,
But I think it's fair to say that it's really exciting potentially. Yeah. Like there's a whole lot that
for sure. Like the PM teams between us, we only met our frame counterparts last week. We're very excited to work with them, but it's still super early days.
Yeah, like they're still getting their Adobe logins and things.
So Brian W. Asks Katie if the Premiere team ever reads their user voice, because Brian is convinced that they're talking into a black hole.
I'm feeling
So I
sad for the
think they
Premiere team
definitely-
here. This is
I know, right?
This is supposed to be the
definitely do.
Dash Premiere team group, but
I mean, I talk to our Premiere friends almost every day, whether that's in meetings or Slack, and they definitely reference user voice. So I'm sure they are reading it.
The big thing that happens is, and Katie, you mentioned this in the chat, there's a Slack channel that notifies us every time a new post comes in. And so a lot of times we have internal discussions about things, but they're often things where we can't say something in public yet. Because even though we have the public beta and we're able to be a lot more open than we used to be, there's still rules about what we can and can't commit to. And so like we can't promise we're going to ship something that we haven't shipped. Like there's a bunch of that kind of regulatory stuff. So we take all of that stuff in and we engage as much as we can. But the other thing is, so there's a huge amount of stuff coming in and we are a really small team, and Premiere's in the same boat. So we're reading everything that's coming in, even if we're not responding publicly.
yeah, what is the rough size of the Premiere and After Effects?
This is it.
This is it. It's just us.
Is it?
Sean
we are.
does all the coding.
No.
Sean, writes the code, I test it. The rest just tell us what to do.
Yeah. What are we? We're about 30 engineers and QE, like so quality testers. These are your product managers, and then we have marketing and design, and we have design, and then there's a lot of shared teams. The way the organization structure is built, there's like 28 different teams in like the video and audio organization inside Adobe. And so there are about half of those are like shared teams. So we have people who help us with color and help us with our render pipeline and help us with our formats and that sort of stuff. So we say 30 engineers, but probably it's more like 40 or 50 all up. But we share those with Premiere and we share those with Audition. And so it's
I was
hard.
gonna say, if there's a lot of competition for those resources, so
Yeah.
we don't want to like oversell how much we have. No, yeah.
Fine. There's like 5 of us.
There's
who
like
did all the
5.
work.
I'm
That's
pretty
it.
sure that's what I've, yeah.
No.
Adobe's- Sorry, Adobe is a really big company, but it's a constellation of tiny teams.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it.
All right, well, we have just under about 5 more minutes left with all of our friends here from Adobe. So I want to make sure that anyone else who has a question gets a chance to speak up or toss it in the chat before we say goodbye for the evening, at least to the chat portion. So if anyone has anything, definitely toss it out there now. While we're waiting, though, what types of things are we starting to see in the betas that are shipping now? Because there's obviously still work to do. So what should we look for testing coming up?
Who wants to talk about scene edit detection? Anyone?
I was gonna say I'm not entirely sure what we can talk
Well,
about.
scene edit detection is in the beta.
Yeah, that's public.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That one's public.
So scene edit detection, if you're in Premiere Pro, you would already know it and have potentially used it. But you can take a video clip and now After Effects will cut it up either by giving you markers along the way or actually break that up into lots of layers and actually lay them out. That way you can actually sort of see all the scenes in your project. And so that's in beta today. But the big one that we launched yesterday was Apple Silicon support. So if you have an M1, MacBook Air, MacBook, or the magical MacBook Pro, Maxes, whatever they are, that is now supported. And I will tell you, I'm talking to you guys on a MacBook Air M1, and just the difference between the Rosetta emulated version and the native version is like 30 or 40% faster. Same hardware, just getting that to actually run on that native version is that sort of difference. But if you go from and I'll use all of our technology, the old non-MFR way to render on an Intel Rosetta version of the build to the native version with MFR, you could be looking at 2x performance increase just by running that beta now. So if you're tired of slow, that's a really fast way for it to be fast. So.
Well, it has cut my coffee breaks down considerably now. So
the goal.
Todd, you have a question.
I have a question. I've been doing some tests, multi-frame rendering tests. I rendered out about 12 minutes of EXRs, and I had to put audio onto them, so I'm dumping that to Media Encoder. And I've tried H.264 as well as ProRes, and the biggest speed increase I saw was with the H.264. I shaved off like 3 hours of rendering, which I was very thankful for. I didn't see much difference between the ProRes version on the multi-frame rendering or 2021 Media Encoder. So I wondered if there were certain flavors of codecs that are improved more due to the multi-frame rendering, or any other tips as far as that goes, where I'm going to see the biggest speed increase for picking a codec.
It's a very good question. So the codec piece, certainly when you're coming out of Media Encoder, is very much dependent on how fast we can get that packaged and put that to disk. ProRes and the difference between H.264 and ProRes, you'll probably see the same performance differences whether you're doing a Premiere Pro export or without MFR. Like there are certain codecs that are just slower, and we're very aware of like PNG sequences absolutely suck right now. Don't use a PNG sequence if you want any sort of performance. The multi-frame rendering is probably actually happening mostly before that final encoding to the codecs that you're choosing there. EXR, while faster, is certainly still a slow format, as much as we've done work over the years. So that's a tougher one for us to sort of speed up. But it is supported with multi-frame rendering, and the underlying plugins are there. So hard to say exactly. Obviously, the H.264 is working, but I would look for the exports that work just the fastest in Media Encoder will work out the same. I know that's not a great answer, but that's,
well, I should say that the ProRes was still faster than the H.264. I just didn't see as big of an increase in a difference between going from multi-frame from 2021. So
yeah, it is interesting. One of the things that we saw unexpectedly, which honestly we probably need to spend some more time on, was the output file size with MFR is actually smaller than with non-MFR renders, and that was a real surprise to us. But what it turned out to be in our investigations is the encoder for H.264 is happy to have lots of frames to work on, as opposed to this is the only next frame I've got data to sort of figure out what to do with. If it's got 10 frames, it can be like, okay, I need a keyframe here, and I can actually be a lot smarter about how I package the rest of it together. So it acts a little bit more like variable frame rate, like a 2-pass variable frame rate, but with like 10 or 15 frames or something like that. So you might be seeing something with H.264 there where it can be smarter about what it's going to package, create a smaller file, and that gets that out faster. So
okay,
we should spend a little bit more time, Katie. We should make a note of that and
take
a look at the difference between the
My notebook's downstairs, but I'll make it.
All right.
I hadn't heard yet. That's really interesting, actually.
The 12 minutes of EXR frames, it was like 4.5 hours to kick that out on 2021, and it was an hour and a half on the multi-frame render. So I was thrilled, you know, and I went to do the same thing with when I needed it as a ProRes file instead of H.264. And while it was still faster than the H.264, there wasn't as big a difference between that and 2021. So.
Yeah, and certainly the ProRes would have been a much larger file output for you in the end. So, not that that's an excuse for us to be slower, but I think there's probably more data there, that we're trying to push around. So
the other factor here could be hardware encoding and decoding support.
Oh, yes.
Some of the formats and in Media Encoder and in After Effects both have hardware acceleration on particular platforms and particular machines, and so you can take advantage of that as well.
Yeah. Which is out in public beta. If you do happen to have an M1 Apple Silicon machine, the Macs and the Pros that have, I know no one's got them because it's like 2 days ago, but the accelerated ProRes hardware support that are in those machines is already supported in our beta. So when that does come, apparently that is significantly faster to get that to disk. So that'll be one option for people who spend $6,000 to buy the machine. But, you know.
Can I just say, while I have all of you on the screen together, beautiful, lovely Adobe people who work so hard for all of our users, this was many versions ago, and I don't know who propelled this, but I'm still in love with the fact that I can now set a designation for guides in my compositions. And I know you guys probably get bombarded with a lot of like, where's this feature? Where's this thing? And I'm just want to like, that thing you did ages ago, still loving it. Thank you so much.
We should let Jessica know. That was all her.
Yeah. Jessica built the UI for composition profiler, the render queue notification system, and rewrote half of our rendering pipeline for this. So, but she also did the guides a few years ago. So we will definitely let her know. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, we're about at time, so I just want to say, yeah, echo Tara, thank you so much, Sean, Victoria, Katie, Christine, and Tim, for hanging out with us and sharing some of your stories and your answering some of our questions. It's greatly, greatly appreciated. I'm personally very happy with all of the work that's been coming out lately. Version 22 is so awesome. I've been driving the beta as my production install for a couple months now, and it's seriously really sped up so much of my work now. It's really great.
It's wonderful to hear. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so so we will let you all go if you need to. You're welcome to hang out as well. We're probably going to be not here for too much longer anyway. But again, thank you, and we'll hopefully see all of you around the internet.
Sounds good.
Oh, nice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks.
All right, so while they're hopping off or hanging out, does anybody have a show and tell to do, or is there anything you want to bring up that might have sparked your interest or that came up with our talk that we just had with Adobe?
Yeah, I was wondering, perhaps this is a little bit of an ignorant question about expressions in After Effects, but like I'm under the impression that some expressions need to look at the previous frame in order to calculate the next frame in expressions. So I was just wondering if that would still work with multi-frame rendering, and I can't think of any examples off the top of my head.
Well, I think, I mean, for those who don't know, I am very into expressions. I'm one of those people that spends like hours trying to optimize something to save myself seconds of time down the road. I don't think it's paid off yet, but I haven't seen any hiccups with expressions really. With multi-frame rendering, that while I've been testing it with the beta, I do know that like expressions will still only look at, they run, they're built, they run, and they get collected and turned off all within one frame. And I think one of the issues is that if you do want to look at values outside of that one frame, you have to like run a loop on those frames either before or after, and it can kind of slow some things down there. So I don't know if that answers your question at all or gives you any more information. But it's expressions have been working with multi-frame.
Sounds good to me.
So it looks like not too many more comments. Or does anybody have anything to show? Everyone is just here for Adobe and to possibly win Creative Cloud, basically.
Did anybody else get looped into having to do cybersecurity awareness motion graphics, or is that just me?
I've been getting our emails from our compliance department.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month. At the end of it. Change those passwords.
Change your passwords. Oh, actually, passphrases are the new
Passphrases,
things
yes.
for cybersecurity.
Or you also use a password manager.
Or use, well.
So, okay, well, we will, well, first of all, I just, again, want to say that it was awesome to have Adobe here. I'm so happy when they're like, yeah, sure, we'll come by. Like, this little tiny group in Upper Midwest, and we get to talk with the project managers for After Effects and hear directly from them about all the cool things that they get to do. I also really want to know like what they can't say. Like what are these features that they're going to be testing that aren't public yet and they're legally bound not to talk about. We'll find out eventually. Okay, well then I think at this point we should move on to giving away some Creative Cloud. So I'm gonna hop on over to our
Wheel of names.
And I wish I could say I was clever, but that's literally the website, wheelofnames.com. So I'm going to say, I'll give everyone a couple seconds to take a look at this list. If you're not there, let me know. Tara, you're not allowed to enter, so don't say that you're not there.
All right. Also, if anyone already has Creative Cloud situated, either with like work or whatever, and you want to be off, just let us know.
You can take me off. I've won fairly recently, so I don't need to.
Brian will take you off? Okay.
And you can take me off too.
I have an enterprise account, but I just realized
So look
that
at
you can't use
Brian
Mixamo.
Klein and Tim Collins.
I can't use Mixamo with an enterprise account, so I don't know.
Hannah, I'm having a hard time hearing you. I'm sorry.
Oh no.
I only caught enterprise out of all of that.
Yeah. I was just I do have an enterprise account, but I realized that you can't use Mixamo through an Adobe enterprise account, and there's no other way to access it. It's the weirdest thing. You can use almost every feature except Mixamo, which
That's
has
goofy.
really screwed me over a lot.
Well,
I don't know. Like, I technically have an enterprise account, but I want to switch. So I would be fine if you took me off. But yeah.
We'll keep you in there so you can maybe get Mixamo for yourself. All right, so we'll go ahead and spin this, and we'll see where we end up. Oh, I just flipped over. So James wins Creative Cloud. And it was so close. It just like edged past at the very end. So James, stick around and we will get your information to get your free year of Creative Cloud. And that is pretty much it for us. I'll talk a little bit about what is coming up if I can find my tab, because there are too many tabs. So our next meetup is going to be Thursday, November 18th. It's in about 3-ish weeks because we had to delay this one a little bit so that we can have all our Adobe folks join. It's going to be Resource Day. So we'd like to try to, if we can, get as much like homegrown resources into this as we can. Obviously, if there's a script that you found in a script that's really awesome, or like some other stock resources or other assets that you have found that are golden gems, feel free to share them. But if you have your own presets that you've made, or your own like technique or workflow that you've kind of developed that you think people would get something out of, even if you don't think people will get something out of it, I guarantee somebody would. So bring your own tips, workflows, presets. And as always, if you got a quick tip, let us know. It might not be used in this one necessarily because the entire meetup might be about quick tips, but we'll stockpile it and get you in. And this will be our last meetup of the year. We usually take December off because everyone has got other stuff to do at the end of the year. And you don't need to hang out on yet another video call. We will try to do some things more informally on Discord and maybe the Facebook group if you're there. But that's going to be it after next month for our little group. So thanks everyone for coming out. Thanks for getting some questions in to the Adobe folks, and we'll see you in a few weeks.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul and Tara.
Happy Halloween.